The Muslim Abbasid Caliphate and the Chinese Tang Dynasty were both in the midst of a territorial expansion towards Central Asia, culminating in the Battle of the Talas in 751. Although natively obscure, this conflict yielded minimal, immediate consequences in the region. Nonetheless, reverberations would reverberate across centuries, shaping the course of the world history. The Tang Dynasty ascended to power in China in 618, initiating westward expansion by 613. The Eastern Turkic Khaganate had been assimilated into Tang territory, with the Western Turkic Khaganate decisively defeated by 657. Despite contentions with the Tibetan Empire to the south and the Second Turkic Khaganate to the north by 715, the Tang Empire emerged as the largest Chinese state since the Han, wielding significant influence into Central Asia, with many regional states becoming vassals. Concurrently, the Muslim Caliphate, having vanquished both the Eastern Roman and Sassanid empires in the mid-7th century, established a sprawling empire. Under the Umayyad dynasty, their dominion extended from Spain to Central Asia and from Arabia to the Caucasus, engaging in numerous conflicts against the Central Asian Turkic tribes. By 715, the Caliphate had sway over much of the Transoxiana. With both empires now vying for dominance over the Silk Road, conflict became inevitable. Though the specifics of the initial clashes remained unclear, the first confrontation occurred in the Fergana Valley in 715, resulting in a defeat for the Muslims despite Tibetan aid. 2 years later, the Chinese dispatched an army of Kaluuk mercenaries, triumphing over the Arabs and Tibetans. Concurrently, Umayyad's expansion faced setbacks due to internal revolts, although several failed attempts ensued until 750, when a rebellion led by the As-Fasafah overthrew the Umayyads, ushering in the Abbasid dynasty. It appears that the Chinese were aware of the Caliphate's internal discord and sought to exploit it in their bid to exert control over Central Asia. In 747, Gao Jianqi, the local Chinese commander, initiated a campaign against the city-states of Gilgit, which was in alliance with the Tibetan Empire. His conquest of Gilgit was swift, leading to his appointment as the governor of the region. He compelled many small kingdoms to pledge alliance to him. Meanwhile, the neighboring states of the Fergana and the Tashkent were engaged in a feud. Fergana sought Chinese assistance, prompting Gao to launch an attack on Tashkent in the spring of 750. The rulers of Tashkent had no resource but to seek aid from the Arabs. Led by Ziyad ibn Sa'id, a Muslim force departed for Samarkand, advancing along the Talas River. Gao, meanwhile, was slowly withdrawn to rendezvous with his Kaluuk allies. The encounter between the two armies finally occurred in the later half of 751, somewhere along the contemporary border of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. The figures regarding the number of combatants in the battle vary significantly in Arabic and Chinese sources. While the former claim approximately 100,000 troops on each side, the later contend that they were about 100,000 troops from the Caliphate and 30,000 to 40,000 warriors. However, the course of the battle indicates a relative parity between the opposing forces. Given the remote location of the battle, hundreds of kilometers from their respective capitals, and with minimal prior preparations, it is plausible that both sides fielded between 30 and 50,000 troops. Ziyad ibn Sa'id's army comprised Arabic soldiers supplemented by contingents from the Tibetan Empire and the Turkic Khaganate. Gao's forces consisted primarily of Chinese troops, with additional support from allied troops from Fergana. It remains unclear from the sources whether the Kaluuk Turks were initially part of the Gao forces or if they did not join his army at all. But the Chinese army relied more heavily on infantry, while their adversaries had a balanced mix of cavalry and infantry units. There are two primary accounts of the battle, both of which we will outline. According to the first account, Ziyad ibn Sa'id arranged his troops in a conventional formation, archers forming the front line, followed by spearmen, heavy cavalry in the rear with his guard, and light cavalry heard in reverse. Gao adopted a similar formation, positioning his crossbowmen and archers at the front, followed by a spearman in the second line, his guard and the Fergana contingent in the third line, with Kaluuk Turks stationed on the extreme flanks. The initial 3 days of the battle unfolded similarly, with Chinese troops launching frontal assaults and gaining an advantage over their adversaries. Archers inflicting significant damage on enemy ranged units. Arab archers were forced to withdraw behind their spearmen, while the infantry line clashed as Gao's better armored spearmen successfully pushed back the enemy, attempting to relieve the pressure on his infantry. The Muslim general dispatched his heavy cavalry to engage the lighter cavalry on the Chinese flanks. However, this maneuver failed to outmaneuver Gao's units, prompting the Chinese general to deploy his reserves into the battle. Similar events unfolded on the second and third days, but on the fourth day, the Kaluuk Turks betrayed the Chinese forces, launching an attack on their infantry from the flanks while the Arab army launched a frontal charge. Gao's army ultimately collapsed, with casualties ranging between 10,000 and 20,000 Arabs, and the Chinese suffering approximately 13,000 losses. A contrasting account of the battle presents a different narrative. For 4 consecutive days, the Chinese and Muslim forces refrained from direct confrontation, while the Third Army, consisting of a smaller Kaluuk force, remained positioned behind the Talas River, abstaining from taking sides. On the 5th day, the Kaluuk forces initiated an attack on the Chinese army from the left flank, coinciding with the Muslim forces' front assault. Whether this coordination between the Kaluks and Arabs were planned remains uncertain. Nevertheless, the Chinese army was overwhelmed, with only a handful of troops near Gao's managing to escape. Tank reinforcements were dispatched to the region, halting European expansion. However, in 755, a major rebellion erupted in China, prompting the withdrawal of troops from Central Asia. The Abbasids also struggled to establish enduring control over the region, allowing Turkic influence to continue bargaining. The Battle of Talas carries significant ramifications. Following the battle, the influence of Buddhism waned in the region, while the disconnect between China and India via land routes accentuated differences between the two branches of Buddhism over the ensuing centuries. Concurrently, the adoption of Islam by the Turks laid the groundwork for Seljuk conquest in the Middle East, the Crusaders, downfall of Byzantium, and the ascension of Ottoman Empire. Moreover, the dissemination of paper-making technology previously guarded by Chinese states was pilfered by the Abbasids and disseminated to the Middle East and Europe.